Um, I was in my early 20s and I was working three jobs and going to college. I lived about 45 minutes away from my parents and just striving to do everything on my own. I don't know if you remember what that's like to, be that young adult and you're trying not to rely on anyone, and yet there are times when life gets really difficult. And I was straining financially. I didn't have a great relationship with my parents. I was working three jobs while I was going to school and trying to make a living, and I just felt like I was failing in every aspect of my life. I was uh, struggling with good grades, everything. So it was like I felt like I was doing nothing right. And I got very sick, and it was the kind of sick where I just knew I was in trouble. And there wasn't anyone around that I felt could help me. So I had to drive down a very steep canyon to get to my mom's house. And when I got there, she took one look at me and knew I was in a lot of trouble. My face was pasty white. I didn't realize I'd lost 30 pounds in the last 3 days. And at the time, I did not have that much weight to lose. And so she took me straight over to the doctor's office. And while I was there, I collapsed. And luckily, the hospital was right next door. They put me right into emergency surgery and found infection. And they pumped out pints and pints of sepsis, of infection. And they were unsure at the time exactly what had caused it, but it was all, around my bowels and my reproductive system. It was just this horrific sepsis. So they pumped all this out, and then they started giving me lots of different kinds of intravenous antibiotics because they wanted to make sure that this, which was making me so ill, was going to get under control right away. But the problem was I kept spiking all these really high temperatures, 103, 104, and they were worried about all kinds of things, maybe even brain damage, because it would stay high for a while and wouldn't come back down. Finally, one night I had a situation where they let that my mom went home for a little while, and it was about 2 o'clock in the morning, and I had been talking to my roommate, and she said, "You're dying, don't you?" And I was floored because I knew that I was, but I didn't think anyone else, except maybe the nurses, knew how terrible a situation I was in. It was a Mack truck experience. And we both listened to nurses outside in the hallway saying, "We better call her mom because she's not going to make it until morning." And I remember my roommate fell asleep, and I was just in so much pain and agony, and my fever had gone up again, and had the most incredible presence that filled my room. Like I saw two beings, but one stood back, and then and one was forward, and Sabrina, he was so radiant and so full of love, and I immediately recognized him. I knew who he was, and I thought, what is Jesus doing here? And every ounce of him was just pouring out unconditional love. He didn't care how much debt I was in. He didn't care that I was struggling in school. He didn't care that I was, failing things. He just loved me for who I was. And I had never felt that intense of unconditional love. It was incredible. And the way I try to explain it is that I could feel every cell in my body vibrating. And as I was looking around the room a little bit, I had one of those hospital trays in front of me, the ones that they'll put your food on or your drink. And and it only had a drink on there, but the metal tray was vibrating. I could see every atom vibrating with his love, and it was extraordinary. It changed me. And there was a point where I went up and I was looking down at my body and looking across at him, just looking at me. And he was saying things to me, but not out loud. And then I was back in my body, and he told me I was being given a second chance at life. And I was just so amazed, because the one thing that was so clear when I recognized I was dying, I just had known that I had not fulfilled the measure of my creation. And I didn't even know what that was. And those were words that came to me later, but all I knew is I had come to do some things and I hadn't done them. And I had felt so sad. So when he gives me this news of you're being given a second chance at life, it was like my whole body exploded in joy. It was this amazingness, and I knew it. And and he went, and the angel went, and I fell asleep. And when I woke up, my fever was down, and the nurse is wheeling in another rack of these intravenous antibiotics. And I told her, hey, I can have all of these, but I can't have this one. And she just looked like, I must be one French fry shy of a Happy Meal. I had no medical experience, no background in this, but I knew this one antibiotic was killing me. So she went to talk to the doctor about how crazy I was. And fortunately, he'd had other experiences in the hospital, even with patients who received information or had situations happen through the years, not all the time, but every once in a while. And he said, well, she's on all the rest of these. Let's take her off this one and see how she does. And within 24 hours, I was able to walk out of that hospital on my own power. And I knew it was miraculous. It was amazing. I mean, during it was so profound. I will tell you, it was the most real thing that I had ever experienced. And a lot of people, they can't see how that can be, but it truly was the most real thing. And the things that he said, I knew. And after, like somehow knowing that I couldn't have that antibiotic was really profound. And to also have the courage to say something, because the way that I was raised, Western medicine was God, and doctors were God, and that's who you should listen to. So I had never spoken up against any medical authority or told them that I didn't agree with something. It was the very first time I took a stand for my own body and said, I can't have this. So I already knew that, number one, I'd been given this second chance, but number two, I wasn't going to take it for granted. I'd been given knowledge and I was going to do something with it.
And then you got back, you walked out of the hospital. What happened afterwards? You still had your 3 jobs, your college that you had to attend to.
Well, I will tell you, I still faced all of the challenges. They were still there when I got home. Um, and, you know, I mentioned to you before the call, it was like while Christ was in the room, I felt like I knew everything, could understand everything, could see everything, could see universes, could understand it all. But when I was back in my body and he had gone away and his presence was gone, I felt a little bereft, like, oh, it's just me. So I knew I had changed, but I also knew I was incredibly human. And um, frankly, I told myself a lie, which I didn't figure out until just a few years ago, when I got to have a conversation again. Sabrina, I told myself that there must be something worth saving. And so I stepped forward to prove that I had been worth saving, that I was a life worth living, that there was something redeemable in me. Because before that visit, I didn't feel like I had a single redeeming quality. After that, I really strove to do better in school, to not take my relationships for granted, to have a much better, more respectful, more kind and loving relationship with my parents. As human as they were, I also saw them for their gifts. And when I looked around in the world, it was really fascinating to me because before I had been so afraid of people, and it was almost as if I was gifted with the ability to see them through God's eyes. Because I could tell you, like, every time they would tell a story or talk about themselves, I could see their immense potential. I could see the threads of their story. I could see where they might be headed. And, I could see how extraordinary their life story was. And it held so much value in my eyes. So I became a storyteller. I started writing stories of gang kids when we moved to Denver. And these were kids that had been plucked out of their lives because they had committed crimes, and they were put into programs to try to rehabilitate them, to try to open their perspectives and to see life in a different way so that they could make different and better choices. And so some of the kids that were really striving to do that, it was really tough because sometimes they came from generations of family involved in gangs. And, but I also saw what happened when one adult believed in them, when one person loved them enough to show them a different way. And then I would see miracle after miracle happen in this young man or young woman's life. And then I got to write a story about it. So it was really wonderful. And they were not infallible. They would still make mistakes and still have struggles, but I would be able to capture a place and time in their stories and something of victory rather than perhaps the victimhood that they had grown up in. And I could see the potential. I fell in love with the human soul. It was extraordinary.
And how has that affected your relationships?
Yeah. I had three sets of parents by the time I was 6 months old because I was adopted. So I had my birth parents, and then who I never really met because they whisked me away. And then I had my foster parents and then adopted parents. And so I had this fixed belief that for the longest time that the grown-ups would leave. That it was just a matter of time, and the ones that I wanted to trust wouldn't be there. So I was fierily independent, and I didn't trust anyone, which is part of the reason why I got into that situation in the first place. So after the hospital, I began to trust more. I began to trust the world more. I began to trust people more. I began to see a lot more opportunities than I ever had. And also just like incredible opportunities, like I said, in people. I could see their potential. Um, One of the things I had to watch for is, and this still happens to me, is I don't often see the games people play in this life, like, the egoic mind games. I just see them and love them for who they are. And so there's been a few times that I've been hurt because I love them and they're still figuring things out. And so there's been a time or two that I've had some additional lessons to learn. Like I had to learn good boundaries. I had to learn not to always take people just at, that surface level because I'm seeing them so deep, but I would often not see a negative side to them. So I had to learn. And then, one of the extraordinary things was if I carried a judgment toward a situation, a people, a religion, a societal issue, any of those things, like God would bring me a story. And I started writing more life stories, and boy, did my perceptions expand. So I began to see just how incredible this variations of life. all around us are. And, even take 10 people in a room and they might all come from the same socioeconomic background in the same town. But because of who their parents were and their life experiences and the things that they had chosen, they would all have a magnificently different story. And just like you said, even AI can't make that up. Like rich and beautiful and amazing stories. So I had to change as a person in a lot of ways. So I learned to trust, just not all the way, until someone proved themselves to me. And then I um, I have a kind of a personality quirk that some people around me drives them crazy, because somebody might have very irritating personality qualities. Maybe they're really OCD or have raging ADHD or a temper or something. And I can handle that because I see the deeper person, if that makes sense. And even in those incredible individuals, I see beautiful, beautiful stories and the threads of their stories. So it's been really an amazing experience. But I've definitely still had my ongoing lessons.
Do you feel though that that's something that was bestowed upon you because of your NDE, or do you also feel that it's been something that you've had to learn yourself to do and train yourself to see the good in people and to see that depth?
I would say that immediately following my near-death experience, I could see the love in people's eyes. I could see the the miracle of their creation, whereas before I didn't trust. And so, what I really needed to learn was boundaries. And I feel like some of the patience came as a gift with that, just being able to see further into who another person is. But the boundaries I had to learn, and and the patience I was given, but not always the ability to navigate or manage, like if someone wanted to be really ugly or cruel or hurtful, it goes against who I am so much that I almost can't conceive of that. And so, my husband, my children, my best friends, they kind of are like, hey, I would be careful here. So sometimes people will have to warn me about other people. But I honestly would rather see the good in others, because I find when we dig down, even at this time when so many people are combating each other, even when there's so many sides, of war, of racism, of economics, of legislation and rules and things that tear people apart. I still see so much good in people, far more good than I ever see evil. And I've written about some deep evil, the daughter of a serial killer, and there's a show out on Paramount Plus called Happy Face, and it goes into a lot about what we wrote about her as a person and how she survived this darkness. I wrote about a woman who was the 19th wife of 65 women and was able to put a prophet pedophile behind bars for life plus 20 years. And I was in the courtroom when he was convicted, and I watched this miraculous young woman take a stand for all her people, even when she was hated. So I just see these incredible examples of what is possible in humankind. It just blows me out of the water every time. Because as humans, we always have desires for other people and how we would love them to show up for us. But they're also on a learning journey. And so learning to love them anyway and to see what gifts they have. I think that's extraordinary. And there's been a lot of studies done on even with these extremely troubled youth, that if they have one person that believes in them, that their entire life trajectory can change. One person. So it makes me always, want to encourage other people to be that one person, and for me to show up in that way as well.
Tell me more about how your image of yourself has changed over these years.
Yeah, thank you. Everybody finds their own story fascinating, so, but it doesn't mean other people will. But I will tell you, after being involved in so many hundreds of people's lives and stories, there are patterns that show up in their rises and falls. And obviously, before my near-death experience, I was suffering from self-esteem. Like, I tried to put on a brave face. I was a very happy, joyful person. But in the midst of my struggles, I really, wore a lot of masks. And um, and afterwards, I didn't even know that I was telling myself this lie. It was my lack of self-confidence and my woundedness had been on such a deep level that even this gift that happened to me, I still had lessons to learn from it. And so what was incredible in over the years to recognize and understand was, oh, I had told myself a lie, um, that I needed to prove myself, when actually he wouldn't care if I was sitting on my couch eating bonbons and watching TV. Like, there was nothing to prove. That's what his visit meant. It's just that deep woundedness kept me pushing and striving to be something that, like I said, redeemable, or that he would be proud of. After these last couple of years, when I realized, because it had to bubble to the surface because it was a lie, and was very uncomfortable for me. Like, it was really deeply interwoven with some of those early beliefs. And so to extricate myself from it was not an easy process. It was painful. And then I felt almost bereft of an identity for a time. Like, who am I if I'm not this person, who's doing things for him? Um and then I realized, like, we have such a spectrum on the planet and in our lives of, like, rich, full, beautiful meaning, and also no meaning. And people will fight for meaning, and people will also lose their lives if there's no meaning. Dr. Frankl was a perfect case of this, where, he had something to live for, even though the rest of his family perished under the Nazi rule and in the concentration camps. But he had a book to write, and he had a gift to give humanity, and it was really important to him. So he assigned meaning in the purpose of a greater gift or contribution to the planet. But he watched people that, when they lost meaning, then they lost their lives. And so in this spectrum of choices, I realized, like, my gift is to see the light in the darkness, to find meaning where sometimes it feels like there isn't any. And my greatest love, my greatest passion, is when an author is working on their own story and then they find it. And I'm getting chills as I'm talking about it. An author who wants to write their life story or a self-help book, and they're excavating their own past and their stories and their patterns, and they're helping to teach either through these stories or through principles. And they'll all of a sudden see, oh my goodness, there's so much more to my life, to what I have to offer the world, than I've ever seen. And they understand this deeper, richer meaning than they ever realized. And that excites me, because they're going to be a greater leader. They're going to be a greater self-master. They're going to be a greater mom or dad, and definitely a leader on the planet, because they have absolutely taken a look at their greatest weaknesses, but found meaning in their rise. So it's pretty cool. And I feel like I had to discover that one for myself as well.
If you were to go back to your 20s and have those jobs, do the college, would you still do everything in a similar way, or what kind of advice would you give younger you right now?
It's such a great question, Sabrina. I think one of the biggest things that I would tell younger me is that I had worth, that I was valuable even when I made mistakes, that I was valuable even when I was in debt, um, and that I was I was made for more than just defeat. And and it still can be a pattern that I have to be aware of. But I think I have I have learned so much about the the glory of the rise. And like, I just went back to school and got a little mini MBA in my own business, and here I am, this old lady. And you know what was extraordinary about it is I almost feel like I had another rebirth experience, because I was able and profoundly to see my life in a different way with more opportunity than I ever had before. But it was also beautiful because it had everything to do with business and growth. But I was also able to bring me into it, um, and my spirituality into it, and my passion for serving people into it. So it because the numbers don't move me, but the numbers, when it is about people being able to do something extraordinary with their life, it does move me. So I think I would tell my younger self, like, you'll always be learning, you'll always be growing, and it's a beautiful dance. And so when you're struggling, take time to stop, to listen to the music of life, and to join the dance.
Now, you work with a lot of authors that are struggling to find at times or to write their life story. And I can imagine perhaps some people come to you not really sure that they have a story to tell or a voice to tell it in. And I know for a lot of our audience, they've been through different kinds of spiritual experiences, perhaps life experiences, and they don't always feel like there's something worth sharing, even though there might be something inside of them, trying to get out. What would you tell people that aren't sure that they have a story to tell?
That is such a great question. And it happens all the time. Uh, it's so fascinating that as humans, there's a part of us that will always doubt how good our story actually is. Will anybody ever listen to this, or read this? Would they ever even care to pick it up or to buy it? And that's why I love it when people will spend the time on it enough to get the deepening, where they recognize, oh, there's magic here. But in the beginning, there's even a name for this. It's called imposter syndrome. And it's something that, unless you're a narcissist or a sociopath, you probably will feel this at some point in the creative process, because real, true creatives have self-doubts. And it also means that you're not just going to throw something out there and just expect that everyone's going to love it. You're going to pour some blood, some sweat, and some tears into it. Um, it also is really important to be vulnerable, because this is where people find value. They don't want to hear from gurus who've, came from family money and made even more money, or, from someone who says they've never made a mistake and they know how to do all these things. People really want to hear from humans who make mistakes, who've had struggles, but have risen beyond it. They want to hear from someone who's even just a step or two ahead, and, is holding out their hand saying, come on, we can do this together. We're all on the same staircase. And sometimes we go back a couple of steps. But we're all on the same staircase. And it can be a really beautiful thing when you finally discover, I do have something to say. In our inspired writers retreats, it's one of the biggest pieces that we work on is this imposter syndrome. Um, and just because it is scary to think about, how do I put this out? Like they could tell a story to a friend or even a group of people and read the room, see how it's being received, change it up a little. But when you have it in book form, like it's permanent, and it goes out into the world, and you can't control whose hands it gets into, who's going to read it, who's going to listen to it if it's inaudible. And so it's very disconcerting, but it is also one of the most beautiful parts of the process is to say, I'm going to trust that this is going to serve someone anyway. Because usually when people want to write, they have gone from being a victim of something to becoming a victor over those life circumstances. Like you said, over those challenges that we face every day. And sometimes they're huge and sometimes they're small, but there might be a whole bunch that feel overwhelming. But the important thing is to say, when you get to that point where you say, the gift, on the hero's journey, we call it an elixir of life. And it is a gift that you have to bring back into the world. So every single step on your journey was not a waste. It now comes in a form that you can gift to someone else so that they don't have to go through the same amount of pain as you did, or maybe instead of it taking 20 years to figure it out, they can figure it out in 2, and then they can even move beyond what you were able to do. So there's a lot of miraculous things that happen when you trust yourself enough to begin the writing journey. It's extraordinary. It's life-changing.
I'm sure it is. You're making me very excited about it.
Good, Sabrina, because that's going to be an important thing I feel on your journey is to write your story.
So, Bridget, for everybody that has listened so far and would love to connect with you or work with you, how can they find you?
Oh, thank you. I would welcome anyone to visit my website. It's called yourinspiredstory.com. Or you can look me up on Instagram or Facebook under Bridget Cook-Burch. And I would love to talk to you about your story. I'd love to be friends, love to hang out together.